we're going to start off talking about the new Disney Plus show, WandaVision, and they did release episodes 1 and 2. There is kind of a bit of a companion series for this too, which I do want to touch on when we get into the spoiler part of it. They have a Legends series that they actually launched too, and they're kind of short, and they kind of catch you up or recap you on the characters. They have one that focuses on Vision. They have one that obviously focuses on, basically Scarlet Witch or Wanda Maximoff, and kind of catch you up.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, it's called Legends. It's on Disney Plus. If you go to the Marvel tab, you can find it over there. But it is intended to be kind of like a catch-up. And I'm kind of glad to see that they're doing this because there's so much content now with the MCU that it might be difficult for some people who may be curious about something because they hear something about it, and it may be a little daunting, for them to get into. And what the Legends series reminded me of is I've talked about on the show how much I love Marvel Saga and or the Marvel Saga. And that was kind of the same thing, but it was in comic book form, back in the late 80s and 90s. And that would kind of catch you up on Marvel Comics history. And that was really fun. So that's what this Legends series is for. So we're going to talk about that just a little bit too. And then I'm going to talk about this crazy deep dive I did where I watched a whole bunch of the movies trying to piece a bunch of stuff together. And I'm still as confused as when I started. Because I watched a ton of stuff trying to see if I could find any relevance for what's happening in the show. But let's start off by talking about our initial impressions of WandaVision, episodes 1 and 2. Eric, why don't you go ahead and go first? Again, we're going to avoid spoilers. Just talk about your general impressions, what you thought about the first 2 episodes. Go ahead and tell us what you thought.
Well, I'm confused. There's no doubt about it. This is a confusing show. I think it's meant to be a confusing show. It's obviously a genre buster. It's hard to kind of hard to define, right? Because essentially what it is like a show within a show. It's not a spoiler, I don't think, to tell people that, basically Wanda, Scarlet Witch and Vision are, for reasons we don't understand, basically like trapped in a sitcom. And it's very like, I guess the biggest influences are obviously like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie. There's very much like that kind of vibe to the show that they're like trapped in. Interestingly enough, I'd heard a bunch of stuff about Dick Van Dyke being like a consultant on this show. And honestly, I'm not feeling a lot of the Dick Van Dyke show in this show, like at all. It's definitely more like Bewitched, I would say. And I Dream of Jeannie. I definitely do get that vibe from the show, which again is like a show within the show. It's very confusing. So I'm kind of confused by it. And I've actually put this out there. I put this out there on Twitter. I put this out on my Clapper account. I've got a Clapper account now. And I actually got a pretty good response by saying this. But this is basically my opinion is there's only one of two ways this show is going to go. Either it's going to be kind of like, in my opinion, it's either going to be like kind of really frustrating and confusing to watch. And you're going to get like this incredibly amazing payoff at the end of the show, and you're going to be like, oh, that's what's going on, that's what this all is, oh, that's really interesting, that's really cool. And obviously it's going to lead into something. People are saying it's going to lead into like the Doctor Strange movie and the multiverse and all that kind of stuff. And so it's either going to be, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion, it's either going to be like you're going to be on this sort of roller coaster of trying to figure out what's going on. It's going to be confusing as hell, and there's going to be this great payoff, or this is going to be a colossal waste of time.
That is definitely an interesting perspective to have. Here is my initial take on WandaVision. How do I put this?
How do you put this?
Let me just say that having watched the first 2 episodes, I know the episodes are going to get better, but my initial thought of it is I feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity in the first 2 episodes. And let me explain why. I feel like the first 2 episodes miss a very important component about what makes the MCU movies and all the content fun. And that's kind of the action. Now, I understand that they're trying to do like a salute to sitcoms. And I also too, because I'm a longtime comic book reader, I read the Vision and Scarlet Witch series back in the day. And I know it starts off with them having a house and they have kids, and it's this kind of like this sort of domestic thing, and where did the kids come from? And I get all that. I totally get all that. Okay. So it's not like that's lost on me. Okay. But where I feel like it's a missed opportunity is because, and I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit, Eric, because I feel like the first episode is very much Dick Van Dyke, the first episode. Now,
Really?
the second episode, the second episode, if you watch it, is very clearly supposed to be Bewitched. When you watch the intro segment and everything, definitely the second one is intended to be Bewitched. Now here's what I mean by missed opportunity, okay? I have watched both of these episodes a total of 3 times. Okay, the second viewing, I fell asleep during both of them, which is why I had to watch it 3 times. So here's kind of my thing.
Wow.
On the third viewing of these, trying to see if there's something I'm missing, okay? All I kept thinking to myself was, what a shame that they did not have Vision, quote unquote, have his superhero secret identity. And they could have also done a salute to the Adventures of Superman with George Reeves.
Ah.
And then you could have had the Marvel action segment, because the first episode could end with them kind of like that kiss on the couch, and then all of a sudden they see this thing on the TV, and he's like, I've got to go to work or something, and you see him kind of turn to Vision, and then he does like the run and the jump out the window, and then in the second episode, it could start off with Vision fighting kind of a classic Vision villain like the Grim Reaper. And it's interesting too, because there is a nod to Grim Reaper in that Bewitched opening credit sequence. You blink and you miss it, but it looks like they have a shape that looks like the Grim Reaper's helmet actually like stuck inside the house. Like it's like in the floorboard or something. It was really interesting. It was really interesting to see all of this. And I just kept thinking, it's like, I just wish they had put a little bit more of that in it. I mean, I didn't hate them. It's not like that, but it was a little strange experience for me, because I kind of felt like they were going to have a little bit more of that kind of in it. Because here's my thing, and this is just my opinion. Again, nobody, throw too many things at me for saying this, but I prefer when they do this kind of content that they nod to the comics, and then they nod to the history of this particular, like, for example, comic book inspired characters in other media. Okay. Yeah. And if they had done that, even though Adventures of Superman is a DC thing, it would have been an interesting way for them to kind of nod to the early years of, superheroics on television. You know what I mean? And kind of sprinkle just a little bit of it, to kind of nod to that. Again, kind of trying to come full circle. So that's kind of my only thing. I just felt like on the third rewatching of these 2 episodes, I felt like it was a little bit of a missed opportunity. So that's my initial hot take. I'm not hating it, but at the same point, I'm really curious to see, and I agree with you on this though, Eric. I do believe that it's either going to be a huge, crazy payoff, or it's going to be frustrating. Like watching Iron Fist frustrating, just with no kung fu.
Now, I never actually saw Iron Fist, so I can't relate to that. But definitely, like I said, I feel like it's going to be one extreme or the other. Like there's going to be like this crazy awesome payoff at the end, or this is just going to be like, whoo. But we do have a comment in the Rogue Gallery, a really good one, I think, actually. John McClay says, I grew up watching shows like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie and the like. I felt they nailed the feeling of those shows, and my thought is that it's going to continue down that path through the decades, slowly revealing a deeper, interesting plot. He goes on to say, I also applaud Marvel for taking the chance to make such a different kind of superhero show.
And that's a great perspective to have. Like Eric said, this is definitely a genre buster. This is definitely them attempting to do something really bold and unique and new. And like I said, I think that it's going to be, as we get into the spoilers, we'll get a little bit deeper into it, because there is some interesting things that are going on in here. But it's going to be interesting to see kind of how they do this, because I'm really curious if they're going to be able to pay off the novelty and the uniqueness of where the premise, like kind of like how it starts. Because, Marvel's got an incredible track record of really being able to really kind of shock and surprise and really kind of wow people. So I'm really curious to see how this is going to evolve. I'm still enjoying the series. It's not that I don't like the series, but that was my only thought, is I just felt like I wish, because some of the Marvel characters, such as Captain America, for example, was in a set of movie serials going back to the 40s, so, the kind of more, I guess, a timely character at the time, but some of these other characters have been adapted into different forms that kind of goes back to that old era of the first time of trying to adapt superheroes, to live action. And that was my only thought, is just, I wish they had just done a little bit of that. But it's still an interesting idea, and we'll see if they're able to pull it off. We'll see if they're able to pull it off.
Going back to what John said, I do agree with you, John, that I think that they are going to have this sort of path where they go through the decades, not just based on the stuff that I've read. I don't know any particular spoilers or anything like that. Like, I don't know anything beyond these first 2 episodes that I've seen, but it's my understanding that's exactly what they're going to do. The problem with that, I think, is going to be, I've seen comments where people are already like, they love this show, and that's fine. But because it's going to kind of evolve and change, I wonder how that's going to affect the fans. Like, if you really like what's going on right now, and all of a sudden they sort of change the premise and they switch to like a different show, like even you were talking about, Dave, like, the possibility of maybe sort of, doing some nods to an old superhero show or something like that. Like, for instance, you mentioned the Superman television show, or, they're possibly, down the line, maybe they could do something like, Batman or something like that, or even the Incredible Hulk, who knows, they could definitely do that. The problem that I'm kind of wondering is going to, that might happen is, if you're liking what you're seeing now and then the show changes, are you still going to like the show?
Yeah, that is an interesting perspective, to see if people can hang with the changes. Because, let's go ahead and get into some spoiler talk, if that's okay. Because if we go too much further, we're going to start indirectly spoiling things. So At this point, we're going to be talking spoilers again for WandaVision episodes 1 and 2. Let's go ahead and start off talking about the first episode. I'm going to read the synopsis here real quick. The first episode, which is just called episode 1, is Wanda and Vision struggle to conceal their powers during dinner with Vision's boss and his wife. Now, it starts off, and this episode specifically had that sort of, like, for me anyway, Dick Van Dyke, Leave It to Beaver, kind of, not as much honeymooners per se, but you could see that it was definitely nodding to the earliest time period, when you're talking about sitcoms on television. And I did see those reports, Eric, that Dick Van Dyke actually did serve as a consultant. And I do feel like that Paul Bettany is definitely channeling Dick Van Dyke in his portrayal. Because when you look at how he's portrayed Vision in all of the movies, it's very, very different, kind of like his approach. And especially in some of the more, and it's interesting too, because if you notice, episode 1 has a little bit more physical humor, I felt like, and then episode 2 has more of the magical humor, which is why, again, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, the first one's definitely Dick Van Dyke, and the second one's definitely Bewitched. But it was interesting to me. I think the strangest thing about this is, in terms of like them revealing or nodding to things, I think the first biggest twist that causes us to pause and question what's happening, because we get that kind of like, it's like a toaster scene. Did you remember that, where it's like it's the Stark toaster and it's going to revolutionize like how you do things in the kitchen, and there's a glowing red light. And it's kind of, I was thinking it was kind of like M. Night Shyamalan. It's like, in Sixth Sense, like if they show us a color, it means more than what we think it means. So it's interesting because the toaster, depending upon how you view it, it could reference the idea of Stark technology, or it could reference the idea of Vision himself. You know what I mean? But then I also kept thinking with the blinking red light, and if you pay attention to the two people who are watching the commercial, the lady kind of looks a little bit kind of concerned are scared as the light is blinking. And I almost wondered if it was kind of more a nod to Wanda's actually origin that actually comes from Age of Ultron, where her and her brother talk about that, this bomb fell into their house and they were basically waiting, quote unquote, for Tony Stark to kill them, right? And I wondered if it was kind of meant to kind of echo that in terms of Wanda's story specifically. But that's kind of our first clue that there's definitely something more going on. What did you make about that with the Stark toaster and the blinking red light?
I didn't notice that at all. I just thought it was like a funny, commercial. Like I thought, oh, this is kind of neat that they're doing like, genre type commercials or whatever. Like that's not the term I really mean. Like vintage, right? Vintage commercials. That's what I mean. That are kind of like dated. I used to watch Buzzer sometimes, which is a game show network. And what they used to do was they used to take some of the really old like game shows, like What's Your Line, like the original stuff, the black and white stuff, and they would actually keep the old commercials in the broadcast because back in the day, shows would have a specific sponsor, and so the commercials were literally like part of the show, like they were actually done like on a set off to the side of where they were filming the rest of the show. That happened all the time. And I think that's kind of neat. So to me, that's what I more got from that. Was I just thought that was an interesting nod to that style, I guess, of doing commercials kind of within the show, because shows, like I said, used to have sponsors. And I thought it was cool that it was Stark Industries. So I didn't get the whole red light thing. That wasn't something that really registered with me. The things that actually registered more with me as far as like the story, how do I put it? The story within the story is the fact that that there's something wrong, because basically a Scarlet Witch and Vision are talking about the fact that they have no idea, how they got married. They don't have rings. And so you can tell there's like gaps. And I thought that kind of stuff was actually more interesting to me than the premise of the show, the actual sitcom that they were stuck in. Again, for me, I did not feel that Dick Van Dyke vibe. I felt it was much more like Bewitched. The whole premise of her, hiding her powers and stuff like that, and her almost getting caught, right? The boss's wife actually almost catches her. That was a premise of Bewitched, like all the time, was, the fact that she was, she was hiding her powers and hiding the fact that she was a witch. And of course, this is Scarlet, Witch. So she's a witch, right? So she's hiding her powers. So, and I'm a big fan of Dick Van Dyke. That's the other thing is, and that's what was kind of weird to me. So, just for me, I don't know how I feel about the whole sitcom format. But I am more fascinated by the bigger story of, why are they here? What happened? Why are there sort of gaps in their memory? And I think it's cool what you pointed out, Dave, because I didn't notice that. And I think that is kind of fascinating what that could be a nod to. Like you mentioned, it could be a nod to Iron Man. It could be an indication of something else, regarding Scarlet Witch's origins, or ultimately what exactly is going on, because I am interested in that.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting because, because it's all black and white, whenever they show us color, I was trying to pay a little bit more attention to what was going on. And it's unusual too, because the Vision's boss is really pushing him, or pushing actually Wanda, tell me your story, tell me your story. And then he has this moment where he kind of chokes, and then her demeanor kind of changes, and she tells him, Vision, save him, and then Vision clearly uses his power and then saves him, and then they kind of leave. It's interesting because part of the first episode is kind of making you question who is doing this to them. It's kind of like what you're wondering, or why is this happening?
Right. And there's also in that moment, it's interesting the way that the wife of the boss reacts to him choking, and you kind of feel like the way that I felt, it was almost like a computer buffering. You know what I mean? Like it got stuck. That's what I felt, and then all of a sudden, Scarlet Witch kind of comes out of it, right? She kind of comes out of the haze, like she kind of comes out of the television show for a second. Yeah. And all of a sudden she's like real again, and she realizes, hey, Vision, do something. You know what I mean?
Right.
But to me, it felt like that was just, because obviously, we're speculating here about what's going on. I felt like it was almost like a computer buffering, and it was stuck, and that's why he was choking and everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a little perplexing. I'm curious to see as we finish the series, you know, what's going to kind of come back to be relevant. You know what I mean, from that
Right.
first episode. If that's good, yeah, I think the big
well,
reveal.
What's that?
Go ahead. I was gonna talk about another one of the big reveals, but go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. That's actually what I want to talk about too. So
yeah, I was just gonna talk at the end of the episode. We get a really huge reveal where basically we can tell that someone is actually watching them in the show. Now, I have heard all manner of rumors and speculation about who it is that's actually watching them, you know, as these memories or whatever this is that's happening as unfolding. The general consensus seems to be that it is attached to Sword, which actually would go back to the Nick Fury end sequence at the end of the last Spider-Man movie, because Nick Fury's with Sword and he's working with the Skrulls or whatever. And so a lot of people are at least the general consensus is that Sword is the one who is actually potentially observing them, and that there's a lot of general fan speculation. A lot of people actually believe that it's Kat Dennings' character, Darcy, from basically the early Thor movies, which I really liked her character in the first Thor movie. And there's a lot of people that are speculating that that's actually Kat Dennings as Darcy, actually observing them in that little end sequence there at the end. So what did you think about that? Obviously, we know that someone is watching either these visions or these alternate reality, which is interesting, visions. This alternate reality, whatever, unfolding. So what did you think about that?
Well, that's the part that I'm most fascinated about. I'm more, I guess you could say there's sort of like an A story and a B story, right? There's sort of like the premise of the sitcom itself and whatever's going on there. And then there's obviously the bigger overarching story, right? Of what the hell is actually going on. Why are they like trapped in this sitcom world or whatever? What is actually going on? So I thought that was a really neat, interesting reveal to see that somebody is watching them, and somebody obviously, you know, appears to maybe be kind of pulling the strings, you know. So the biggest thing and that I was interested in, and I'm sure that you know better than me, Dave, is there is a symbol like on his paperwork. Do you know what the symbol is?
I'm going to be honest with you. I noticed there's a lot of symbols in the show. Some of them reflect back to Sword, but I didn't actually notice the symbol on the paperwork.
So there is a symbol, and I haven't seen direct speculation on what it is. I do know that there are people that I've heard Sword, and I don't know a lot about Sword personally, but I have also heard people that think it's Hydra, you know, that possibly it's an agent of Hydra.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. We do have some really cool comments actually going on over here in the Rogues Gallery. If we want to put some of those up. Actually, John McLay actually makes a really interesting point I hadn't thought of. He says, like, I feel like all the other characters on the show in the Pleasantville scenario are real people just like Wanda, and are somehow being controlled, manipulated, which is why Wanda was so emphatic that Vision save his boss. That's a very interesting perspective to have and point of view. I hadn't even thought about that, because I feel like there's a moment in the second episode where you can tell that definitely Wanda has a little bit more control about what's happening. It almost makes me wonder if this sort of sitcom scenario is sort of like a safety, you know, like Wanda's created this sort of scenario to maybe even help protect these people while they're being manipulated, or maybe this scenario is actually helping to keep them safe. You know what I mean? Because it's interesting too. Well, we got to get in the second episode to get further into my theory. But it's very interesting. I hadn't quite thought about that, John. That's a great point to make, that maybe the people in the Pleasantville scenario, that maybe most or all of them are actually real people. That would explain why Wanda is so emphatic when she tells Vision to save his boss. Because if it is just a figment of her imagination, you know, why would she be so specific? It's a very interesting point.
Yeah, it is an interesting point, and I do want to point out, John, that I hadn't considered that. Because for me, I felt like it's the opposite. You know, personally, I thought that this is like, these aren't real people. You know what I mean? We know basically Vision's not, you know what I mean? He's dead. So it's like, I actually thought it was the opposite, but I do like your point, John, because I hadn't considered that.
It adds a whole other level of dimension to the storytelling if it turns out that these people are actually real. Because we know from the trailers that Sword or whatever this group that's outside of this dome or whatever, this area that's being affected, and we know this from the trailers, there's an area being affected. It would be interesting if it turns out that that's actually an entire town that's been affected. And if this whole fictitious thing that Wanda is kind of putting these people through, if this Pleasantville scenario, if this is Wanda's attempt to actually protect the people of this town. I hadn't even considered that at all. That's a very interesting.
Neither had
I hadn't even thought about
that. I
had
the complete opposite take on it, but I think it's an interesting theory, John. And obviously, at this point, your theory is as good as ours.
And then Robert says, he says it gives it a bit of House of Val Vista.
That's in reference to another project that Rob and I are working on. It's called The House on Val Vista. And it's actually in reference to another project that Rob and I are hoping to get into.
Interesting.
Fortunately, there's not a whole lot I can say about it.
Don't. If it's something you guys are developing,
he would just throwing that out there. It's just it's a film premise that him and I have been working on.
Well, that's interesting. So let's go ahead and go into the second episode if that's okay, because I feel like the second episode definitely has a lot more kind of big, shocking kind of reveals. So the synopsis for the second episode, which is just titled Episode 2, because even the titles of these episodes, they don't give you any hints what in the heck's going on. Episode 2, the synopsis basically states, in an effort to fit in, Wanda and Vision perform a magic act in their community talent show. Now, this is the one that I love this opening sequence. I thought the opening sequence was really, really cool. Definitely Bewitched, right? Like it's very clearly a Bewitched kind of thing. And what's interesting about this particular opening sequence, if you pay attention, is there's some kind of interesting things that they've kind of put in that opening sequence. If you're like a comic book fan, during the opening sequence, they actually show what looks like the Grim Reaper's helmet actually stuck in the floorboards of the house when Vision is phasing in between things. When Wanda is actually in the supermarket, if you're paying attention to a lot of the things like in the background, like the stuff that's on the walls, there's all these nods to all this kind of comic book history and sort of the comic book story of Vision and Wanda. Because for those people who are maybe been introduced to the MCU primarily through the movies, they may not realize that Wanda Maximoff in the comic books is actually the daughter of Magneto.
Right. Yeah, I actually knew that.
Yeah. And in addition to that, Wanda is one of the earliest mutants, actually going back to the 60s, because she was actually a part of, Magneto's, Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, right? Like that she was one of them, as well as Quicksilver, her brother. So she started off as a villain, daughter of Magneto. And Vision's history is interesting too, because just kind of like in the movies where Vision is an amalgamation of different things in order to create him. But it's a different kind of people that are involved. Actually, the original Ant-Man, Hank Pym, is involved in the creation of Vision. It is kind of slightly connected to Ultron. But what's interesting is that a lot of Vision's personality is an imprint from another character called Wonder Man. So it's interesting because if you look in the background, there's like little like Wonder this, Wonder that, and it's not just Wonder Bread. I feel like they're actually nodding to actually Wonder Man. And Wonder Man's brother is actually the Grim Reaper. And so there's a lot of classic Avengers stories that always start off with the Grim Reapers showing up and, trying to basically, he's always in conflict with Wonder Man and Vision at the same time, it seems like. Like there's just like this constant like circling of these different characters. So it's interesting. If you look at the opening credits, you can see the Grim Reaper's helmet. So there's all these weird little nods to things in the opening credit, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily hinting at anything we're going to see, but that's what started me down my trail about, wow, it's a real shame that they didn't do an Adventures of Superman thing and actually have Vision be a superhero. So we could have actually seen him fight the Grim Reaper, you know what I mean, like in a little opening sequence, and had it have sort of that Adventures of Superman kind of special effects of the day and kind of little bit of fun, right?
Yeah.
And then it'd be interesting too, because I thought it was interesting how they're definitely hiding their powers, but they're also hiding a little bit of their like superhero identities from people. They don't want them to know that they were these superheroes either. It's interesting. It's just a lot of stuff going on. So in the second episode, obviously they're getting ready for this magic show. There's stuff all over the place in this one. Like if you look at the magic box, you know, what's in the box? You know, the magic box, it looks like it has the Infinity Stone on it, the soul gem or whatever it is that Vision actually had in his head that Thanos actually ripped out of his head when he killed him in the movies, is on the box. There's stuff all over the place in this one, but I think the first big thing is that we keep hearing this banging. The episode starts off with this banging, and they kind of have this like, what is that? What is that? What is that? That banging. And then later on in the episode, one of the big reveals is Wanda hears that sound and she looks out, and there's this helicopter. It's like a toy helicopter, and it's stuck in these bushes. She picks the helicopter up. Number one, it's in Iron Man's colors, right? It's a helicopter. It has the sword logo on it. That's that little weird logo that's actually on the helicopter. And I was really confused by this. I was confused by it because it's Tony Stark's colors, but it has the sword logo. Because unless I'm mistaken, when I originally was reading about the sword as the organization, most of what I read about in the comics, when I was reading, it involved a lot of stuff that involved the X-Men and the Beast, which is Hank McCoy. And that's how it's kind of introduced actually to Sword, was actually in the pages of X-Men comic books of all things. So I was really kind of confused by the helicopter. I'm not exactly sure the significance of it is, beyond the fact that it's a nod that there's something outside trying to get in. I mean, I understand this idea, but beyond that, I was a little thrown off because I don't immediately get what the helicopter is supposed to signify. What about
you?
Eric?
John has a really cool theory. So John says, I think that was a real helicopter that tried to infiltrate the town and then was turned into a toy. I like that, John. I think that's an interesting theory.
Well, if that theory turns out to be true, there's a lot of speculation that Mephisto actually has a hand in what's going on too. So it's going to be really interesting because Wanda's story touches on a lot of interesting concepts and ideas. I do feel like that Agnes in the show, I do think there's a generalized belief or theory that she is supposed to be Abigail Harkness or Agnes Harkness or whatever it is, and actually as a character that in the comic books actually helped train Wanda and how to actually use her abilities. Wanda is incredibly powerful. We've barely seen this in the movies, but in the comic books, I mean, she's got a power level the likes of which, no one, I think the only person that would come close would, be Thor or even Doctor Strange. But even then, maybe.
Well, I've heard people say before that Scarlet Witch is the most powerful character in all of Marvel. I've heard people say that before.
Yeah, so she definitely could turn something into a toy, but I've heard all this rumblings and speculation that Mephisto has something to do with this. Wanda's story actually touches on characters such as the High Evolutionary. There's so many directions and so many things that could be revealed through the course of this. I know a lot of people are hoping that there's a classic storyline called House of M, where at the end of it, Wanda basically utters the phrase, "No more mutants," and all the mutants in the Marvel Universe disappear. I know a lot of people are hoping she will utter some kind of expression that causes mutants to suddenly exist, so it'll bring the X-Men in. So there's a lot of ways this could go, but I do like John's theory. That's interesting because it could have kind of explained it. But it's interesting too because that means that Wanda may not have intentionally turned it into the helicopter. So maybe it is either the organization or the group or the being that's causing all of this that she's trying to protect the people from. Maybe that whatever turned it into I don't know. I was really confused by the helicopter. I didn't quite get it. So, and the coloring made it even weirder for me because I was like, I didn't understand what that meant. So as we go forward in the show, I'm really curious to see what's going to be revealed.
Well, to dovetail off of what John was saying, you know, my theory is very similar to John's in that I felt like it was kind of like reality creeping in somehow. And that's what the color is supposed to symbolize as well. Is like, it's kind of like reality creeping in. So like, I didn't necessarily think what John thinks, and that it literally was like a helicopter infiltrating the town. And then it was just like turned into a toy. I thought it was more like a sort of a symbolism of the outside world kind of creeping in. That's the way I took it.
Right. And that's what I thought the banging symbolized, was that it was the outside world trying to break in. So as this happens, we see them preparing for the talent show, and the talent show has been put on this one lady, this blonde-haired lady. I can't remember her name. And she is kind of like sort of the queen bee, if you will, of the neighborhood. And
she's the town bitch.
Well, that's the way to put it. So they're going over there to meet with her and kind of have their strategy session and of like what they're going to be doing for the talent show, right? And kind of get all their ducks in a row or whatever. So they go over to have the meeting, right? And this is another one of the big reveals. Towards the one of them is, and I didn't know this, but apparently, depending upon what you want to call her, Monica Rambeau, I still think of her as you know, Captain Marvel, because when I was playing the Marvel superhero role-playing game back in the 80s, she was the Captain Marvel at that time. I know she was called Photon at one point. Like, she's had a lot of different names. Again, another really, really powerful character. I guess it's supposed to be Monica that's actually there at the little get-together. And there's an interesting symbolism because there's been a lot of speculation and people pointing out the fact that she's got this little brooch on her jacket. And then the brooch actually is the symbol of when Doctor Strange opens a portal. So that could have just been like a little touch, or it could be telling us something. I'm not sure. But the big, big reveal, though, is that Wanda and the lady who's organizing the talent show, that she's trying to tell her, she's like, look, what I'm doing is not meant to hurt anyone or whatever else. And she's definitely trying to kind of talk this lady down because she has like a weird reaction as she breaks this glass in her hand. And then we see color again because we see the lady's blood in her hand. And then we get this this message coming over the radio. And it's weird because the voice, to me, I didn't immediately know who the voice was. I do believe there's a general theory that it actually is a character that we've seen in the other Marvel movies. But amongst my friends and people I've been talking to prior to doing the show tonight, there was a lot of people that felt like it sounded a little bit like Chris Evans. But in hindsight, I don't think it is. But basically, this voice over the radio is saying, Wanda, who's doing this to you? So it's clearly someone trying to contact her and try and figure out or deduce what is going on. So it's another example of the real world trying to basically enter into this vision, this dream state, whatever this is that Wanda is wrapped up in, and basically make contact with her. And it's interesting, too, that she clearly states to the lady who's organizing the talent show, I'm not trying to hurt anyone, which I thought was interesting. What did you make of all that, Eric?
It's really confusing. I am fascinated by that whole aspect of the story. Again, like, you know, there's sort of like the A story and the B story. There's sort of the premise of the sitcom itself, right? Which is, you know, that they're doing this talent show to benefit the local school. And then at the same time, Vision has this weird quirk where he swallows a piece of gum, and apparently it like makes him malfunction and act like he's drunk or something like that, which I thought was kind of weird. And I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know how I feel about the whole sitcom situations. You know what I mean? Like they're a little cheesy to me, but I am very fascinated about the bigger overarching story of who is that person on the radio. And honestly, I have no idea. I didn't pick up on the fact that it sounded like Chris Evans. I was trying to kind of feel like, does this sound like somebody, you know, from the MCU, one of the actors or whatever? And I couldn't really think of anybody. So I'm really fascinated by that. And who is that? Is this an established character? Is this a new character that we're going to be introduced to? Who is it? And also, how is it that they're able to break through? You know what I mean? How is it they are able to communicate through whatever's happening, whether it's a simulation, like you said, a dream state, whether it's an actual alternate reality, which I kind of feel like, it is, but at the same time, we did see somebody's observing this. So that's kind of weird too. You know what I mean? So it is fascinating to me. I as far as who that is, how they're kind of getting in there, how they're able to communicate with her. And obviously I think it's going to be something that's expanded upon, and I'm looking forward to finding that out.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, but again, that's one of the big reveals. We do get another one of those commercial breaks, and they basically definitely give us a Hydra callback, with this Strucker watch, which actually, again, Baron von Strucker, we see at the beginning of Age of Ultron. I think that's he's seen actually before then, but that's kind of like his big moment where we kind of get the most of him. And Baron von Strucker, was a part of a very big Marvel miniseries, like back in the late 80s, early 90s, and is, obviously attached to Hydra. And it's interesting because I've been wrapping my head around what in the world this is supposed to symbolize, because it's time, right? Time, because it's a timepiece, it's a watch. And they say that you're never complete without your Strucker, which we know Baron von Strucker had a hand in manipulating the energy in the MCU version of the origin of Scarlet Witch, and basically giving her powers, because she's an augmented person. She's not a mutant in the current MCU, even though those of us that are diehard comic fans who've loved these characters since forever, we all know Wanda as not only being a mutant, a very powerful mutant, and actually being one of the earliest mutants, an early, basically, villainous character that fought the X-Men. And so it's interesting. And I had a hard time trying to figure out what I thought this meant, other than I got the idea you're not complete without your Strucker, because without Baron von Strucker, Wanda Maximoff wouldn't have her powers. But I didn't understand the time, like it being a timepiece or being a watch. I didn't understand if there was any additional meaning in terms of what it had to do with the story, other than I'm just rambling and I'm wasting time. Eric, what did you think about that? Did you get any significance out of that at all, or?
No, I mean, I other than the Hydra thing, obviously that's something that, that comes through. It's an obvious thing. Obviously, it's an obvious thing. Obviously, I mean, it's the Hydra thing. That's the biggest takeaway I had from it. But interestingly enough, as you're talking about it, it does kind of, I'm wondering if it does tie in to the later reveal, right? Because there's a later reveal after all this where someone does appear to be infiltrating the world, right? Somebody actually comes out from the sewer, right. And Wanda, the Scarlet Witch has this really crazy reaction. Like, this is not good. Like, she knows like something's wrong, and she actually does reverse time. So I'm wondering if that's sort of the connection, because she does actually reverse time, and obviously in the commercial it's a timepiece, so that I could see a connection there.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. So
I just started thinking about that as you were talking. Like, that's
it's that I hadn't thought about that. That's an interesting observation that I hadn't actually put together. So again, the show goes forward. They do the magic show. We continue to move forward. They win an award. There's a lot of different things that could be nods to different stuff. But the next really big reveal is the one that Eric has already mentioned, and that is where they're out on the street. This manhole cover opens up. This guy crawls out of it. He's like a beekeeper. He's got bees swarming all around him. He has a logo on the back of his workman's overalls, coveralls, or whatever. And Wanda has a very, very, like you said, intense. It's just like in the first episode where it's like she snaps out of her fictional reality and then she's kind of herself again, and she has to do something or use her powers or whatever, like what we saw in the last one where she's very specific. Vision save him. And this one, she says, oh shoot, now I'm blanking on it. She just says something like no, doesn't she? I can't remember exactly what she
I can't
says
remember
now.
what she says either. I can't remember exactly what it. I just remember the reaction, and it's very similar to what happened with the choking. You know, you have this sense that Wanda is now all of a sudden like the real reality is kind of creeping in, and she kind of is recognizing that, like she's getting that simulation part of it, which, you know, you get the sense that she doesn't want the simulation to end, or the dream state, whatever we're going to call it, right? You get that sense that Wanda wants us to keep going, which makes sense, right? Because Vision's here, right? And Vision's dead. So here she's got Vision, who she's in love with, right? And so you get the sense that she wants to keep that going. So when something like that happens, you realize that she's kind of being taken out of it for a second, and suddenly she's kind of like the real reality is creeping into her head. So I find that really interesting. And obviously she thinks it's a bad thing. There has to be some sort of symbolism, I would imagine, about the beekeeper suit and all that kind of stuff, but I have no idea what that would be. Obviously there's something to that. I have no idea what that would be.
And I've watched some speculation videos and some different things trying to see if anyone has any theories about that. Some people think that it's a call back to this, you know, older Marvel, you know, villain character or whatever, which I don't think it's that. That to me, that seems kind of silly. But
what
you know,
character do they think it's a callback to? Just curious.
I don't remember the character's name. It's not one I was terribly familiar with. But
the beekeeper.
Well, here's the thing. Okay. I think they're saying it relates to a character called Swarm, and there's been a lot of characters that have been called Swarm in the MCU. Although the most notorious version of Swarm, I think of actually from Spider-Man Amazing Friends, it's clearly not a nod to that at all. But what I think of in that moment is because, you know, a beekeeper, you know what I mean, is, you know, kind of maintaining and keeping the hive and keeping it all together in order to harvest things from it. It definitely has sort of like an ominous tone. You know what I mean?
I like that. That he was coming in to harvest something. I like that.
Yeah. I that's what I think. I could be totally off base, could be totally wrong, but her reaction when she's kind of like no, and she kind of rewinds time, very clearly his arrival is bad.
Right.
And she doesn't
at least bad
want
for her
that to happen. Yeah, exactly.
You know, whatever it is that she's wanting, or whatever her kind of like agenda is, which is difficult to ascertain. He doesn't fit into that, obviously. Right.
And then after that kind of moment, our next big reveal is towards the end of the episode, and that's basically where the room starts to change, color starts to come in, and it's very clear that the show is moving into a you know, Brady Bunch is what I thought of in terms of the color scheme. It's definitely sort of like it's interesting because a lot of people are immediately going to 70s, and I could kind of see 70s, but you know, there was some color sitcoms in the 60s. You know, Bewitched was color at one point. So I don't think it immediately means
as well.
Yeah, so I don't think it immediately means that we're going right to the 70s. I mean, we might be, but in my mind anyway, I could see the kind of the more Brady Bunch idea, but color kind of enters into it, and then the big thing is it turns out that Wanda appears to be pregnant. And that's kind of where we leave it. They kind of have a kiss, and then we get the recall again, like the last one. Someone is still watching, right? So what did you think about all this, Eric? I mean, it definitely feels like that Wanda is kind of rewriting the reality and moving the story forward in some manner. But why she's doing it, I have no idea.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting is this to me tells us why we got 2 episodes. You know what I mean? This is the reason that we got 2 episodes. And I feel like the producers, you know, or Disney themselves, the executives made a decision here to say, you know what? We don't want to leave them with the black and white, you know, because I can kind of feel them thinking, are people going to like this or not? Right. And the rest of the show obviously is going to be in color. So I think that's the reason that they had these 2 episodes packaged together, is they wanted to show us that, yes, the rest of the show is going to be in color, right? Which again, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about before. If you're one of those people that liked what they were doing, well, now they've made a major change, right? In terms of going from that classic black and white, you know, sitcom type thing. Now they're going to color. So that makes me wonder about the fandom and whether people that were like, whoa, I love this show, this is so great. Well, it's like now you're going to have this big, huge change, right? So it's like, are people going to respond to that one way or another? I don't know. I mean, I don't really like the whole sitcom thing, to be honest with you. I just feel like the sitcom thing is like, I feel like it's a parody of a sitcom almost. You know what I mean? That's just the way that I feel about it so far. But I am interested to see what they're going to do in terms of like the next type of show they're going to do. Like you said, maybe it's going to be Brady Bunch, and maybe I'll like that a little bit better than I like the other two. You know, we'll just have to see, because again, it's like it's always going to be like a show within a show, and either you're going to respond to it and like it, or you're not.
Well, it's interesting because as it moves forward, I'm beginning to wonder: are they going to give us nods? You know, again, like I said, again, going back to superhero characters adapted to live action, you know, on television. As we move into the 70s, that's when we start hitting, you know, Marvel's some of their most memorable, you know, live action attempts, and some of their most successful attempts, you know, where the legacy, for example, the legacy of the Incredible Hulk show with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno looms so large that I feel like sometimes it hampers, you know, trying to bring the comic book version of the Incredible Hulk to the big screen, because people's memories, you know, the Lonely Man theme and all that are so strong that it sometimes it almost taints trying to adapt that character, because that's what people know, that's what they understand. So as
that's like the definitive version of the character to me, because that's what I grew up with. I didn't read the Incredible Hulk comics, so I you know, for me, the first time that I saw the Hulk was that television show, and then the next version that I saw was the cartoon, the Saturday morning cartoon they had that was you know, at the same time as like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. So it's like it definitely kind of defines the character for me. I would be interested to see if they did something with that. I don't know how it would fit. You know what I mean? Like, because it seems like they're very sitcom heavy. You know what I mean? Like it's always sitcoms, so I don't know how it would fit.
I got a great scenario for you, though, that would be amazing if they did it. I would love it if they did it. If the moment that breaks kind of breaks the reality, and we go from like this fictional created manufactured thing into like the actual real world, if in the process of someone breaking in, we get a replay where, you know, the wheel, one of the wheels gets blown out in the car, it gets flipped over just like the Incredible Hulk. And maybe the kids are trapped inside, and Wanda and Vision are struggling to break the kids out of the car, and we get those nods to the Incredible Hulk. I kind of got chills. That'd be awesome. Like,
that would be awesome.
That would be a fun way to nod to the Hulk and not spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah.
But if they use that as the moment that kind of breaks through, you know, the fictional into the what we think of as more the real MCU, that's kind of cool too, because the Hulk was Marvel's first real breakthrough into live action. That was their first big, really huge success, was the Hulk television series. That says a lot. If they were to do something like that, I'd clap. I'd be like, hell yeah, that's pretty awesome. Well, so we'll see what they got planned. But as we move forward, that's my only thing, is I would like to see them, again, as we're moving into the 70s, I'd like to see a little bit of nods to, you know, Marvel's history on television, because, you know, whether you did or did not like, you know, the Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man show, the Red Brown Captain America, or whatever, I do feel like that the Incredible Hulk looms large, and I do feel like they should do something to nod that, because that was their first big television success.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think you have a great way of making it fit. I love that premise, and that would be a great nod to the show, and a great way, actually, it would just be like a great way to end the whole thing. But it'll be interesting to see whether they do that or not. It'll be interesting to see if they actually do get into drama at all, or does maintain sort of the sitcom reality, or not.
Well, and again, I think the Incredible Hulk show is your kind of your touchstone moment, if you're going to do a callback, because if you think about it, when you watch the original Hulk pilot, which I still love to this day, I still, in my mind, is still the best version of the character. I'm sorry if anyone wants to burn me at the stake for saying that. You know, but I do feel like that's your amazing moment, because if you remember, the pilot starts with almost a sitcom-y kind of thing, because, you know, Bill Bixby was you know, when you're talking about, you know, My Favorite Martian, whether you're talking about oh, what was the show he was in that was a little bit more dramatic? I can't remember the name of it now. Um, but anyhow, Bill Bixby was a television star. He was the big name on the original Hulk television series. And you have when the pilot opens, it has that sitcom kind of moments where almost like there's like this Buster Keaton like silliness. You know what I mean? Like it feels like a sitcom setups, with them in the rain and kind of being playful, David Banner and his wife. We're talking about the pilot, right? That's why I'm using the term David Banner, not Bruce Banner. We're talking about the Hulk TV series. There is that that almost sitcom kind of opening, and that's when we get to that moment where the car wreck happens and all the drama and the tension comes in and the tone of the pilot changes, and that's when it gets somber and it carries that mood forward for the rest of the Hulk pilot. I don't know. I think there's something interesting there. We'll see if the people that are producing WandaVision, if they're thinking about it in those terms, if they want to nod to that moment in Marvel's history or not. I'll be curious to see. For myself, that's one of the things I'm going to be looking for, is if they're going to do anything to actually salute and celebrate Marvel on television as we move, obviously, from what seems like 40s, 50s, 60s, into the 70s, into the 80s and such, because that for me, that's that sweet part where Marvel began to break through with live action, and not just comic book fans became to know a little bit about the Marvel universe.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. I really like your premise there. And by the way, Jane is in the house, and she mentions it was Eddie's father's TV show. That's what you were talking about.
Yeah. That's it. Thanks, Mom. So if that's good, I think we're going to move on from WandaVision.
Well, do you have any other? So no other speculation about anything that's going on, or predictions or anything like that?
Well, I know from the trailer that we're going to get somehow Monica Rambeau is going to be brought into it. She's either going to have her powers or have her powers at the end of this series. I think that's pretty much foregone conclusion. So I'm curious to see, because they're not going to call her Captain Marvel, even though to me Monica Rambeau is Captain Marvel. So I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do all that. I'm curious to see how they're going to do that. Beyond that, I'm going to be honest with you. There's so much speculation about X-Men stuff. Wanda is so deeply rooted into the mutant side of the Marvel universe and the X-Men. I just hope we're going to get something that's going to introduce the X-Men and mutants into the Marvel. That's what I hope is going to be the outgrowth of this. I know we're going to get this multiverse idea. I know Marvel's going to totally steal DC's thunder before they get around to it. That's what they always do. But I just hope that we get somehow the introduction of mutants into the Marvel universe during the course of the WandaVision series. That's my only real hope. As far as predictions for what's going to happen, I really don't know. It's like I said, I'm completely lost. I'm grasping at straws with my theories. So I would just think I would like to see a nod to Marvel television, from the 70s and 80s, because that's when they had their big successes with the Incredible Hulk. I'd like to see that. I want to see how Monica gets her powers, if she already has her powers. And I want to see somehow the X-Men introduced or hinted at during the course of the series. Beyond that, I honestly have no friggin' idea what they're doing. I'm completely lost.
Well, I think obviously what they're doing is, as you mentioned, is they're introducing the whole concept of the multiverse. This is going to have some relevance to that, whether this is actually a different universe or not, or whether it's a simulation. We don't know yet, but there's going to be something with that. I'm very curious because I know, at least I've heard, I shouldn't say I know because it's rumor and just stuff that I've heard. This is supposed to all lead up to the Doctor Strange movie and the real sort of like introduction of the multiverse. So I think something's going to happen with that. Whether Doctor Strange is actually going to be the one that maybe gets her out of this, or maybe he's the one that's doing this, I don't know. But it's going to be interesting to see whether he actually does show up. But I think that's where it's all going to end up leading to that. It's basically that sort of introduction, so that when the Doctor Strange movie comes out, we kind of know what's going on.
And the title of that show that Bill Bixby was in was actually The Courtship of Eddie's Father. Okay. That was the name of the show, Courtship of Eddie's Father. So I'm kind of hoping that, again, like I said, we nod to the Hulk TV series, because I feel like it's important and significant. But and I agree with you, Eric. Definitely the multiverse obviously is going to be introduced to this. I'm just curious to see how this is all going to play out. I honestly, I don't have a lot of obvious predictions because, like I said, I'm lost.
Do you think that this is a simulation, or do you think it actually is some sort of alternate reality?
I think at the moment it's probably a simulation, but by the end of the show, something's going to happen, and all of a sudden she's going to cause the multiverse. It's going to split. It's going to break. And I think at that point it will be alternate realities. At the moment, it might be a simulation, but before the end of the show, I think it is going to be alternate realities. So that's what I think. I think we had a bit of a slowdown there on the stream.
Yeah, we had a hiccup there, so I lost a little bit of what you were saying. But yeah, I kind of agree. I think I agree with you. So I think right now what we're seeing is some sort of simulation, but eventually what's going to happen is because of her powers that it's going to become like a real reality or something like that. And it's like you said, it's going to cause, ramifications. And I would think the whole reason for it is because she doesn't want to lose vision. That's very clear. That's what's going on, in my opinion, that when you see the hiccups in the stream, if you will, that basically that's what's happening is she does not want to give up vision. So I feel like she's going to somehow bring him back, but it's not going to really be him, right? It's going to be like an alternate version of him, right? So because obviously he's dead. So you know what I mean? I think that's what's going to lead to the multiverse.
Well, and one of the comic books I have, we've been talking about how I'm going to start getting stuff CGC slabbed and graded. One of the books I have set aside is actually West Coast Avengers, and that's the one where Vision returns back from the dead, but he's kind of lost all of his emotions. He's kind of like Data. And that's when you see, at least in my mind anyway, one of the classic versions of Vision where his costume has no color in it whatsoever. And that's because when Wanda asks him, why is there no color in your suit? And it's because he doesn't understand what the point of color is anymore. It's irrelevant to him. And that's kind of where their relationship kind of, breaks and fractures and kind of ends, is because he's basically not the man that she knew anymore. He's something else. So I feel like they're definitely going to have to nod to that in this show. If
that makes a lot of sense. That'd be really interesting too. You know what I mean? If that's what ultimately happens, like she's able to sort of bring him back, but he's, not the same. That would be really interesting.
I wonder if maybe that's kind of what's happening at the moment. Maybe she is somehow in some aspect of his consciousness or something and is trying to bring him back. And it's caused some of what we're witnessing. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where this is all going.
It's fun to speculate because this is a weird show. I mean, this is definitely a show that's just perfect for speculation because who really knows what's going on until we get that big reveal at the end.
Right. And then looks like let me get back over. We do have another comment. Oh yes, John.
So tragic.
So tragic. I agree. That was a big. I loved that. That was probably, I think, when I was my most voracious Marvel reader was actually during that time period. I loved all that stuff. I was reading West Coast Event, and that time period in comics, I feel like is something that we're seeing with a lot of the Marvel shows right now. Because if you think about it, Falcon and Winter Soldier, I think we are getting the introduction of U.S. Agent. And U.S. Agent, he was a really important character in that quote unquote new era of Marvel. That's when we had the Gray Hulk return, who eventually became Mr. Fix-It. That was the Silver Centurion, the red and silver version of the Iron Man armor. That was, Vision with all the color out of him. And he was like Data and he couldn't relate to humans anymore. And he lost all his emotions. And, it kind of fractured his relationship with Wanda. I feel like a lot of these things we're seeing play out, harkens back to that time. And I feel like that's kind of where we're leading to. But I'm just curious how much of that they're going to try and introduce through WandaVision and actually through the Disney Plus shows. Because it definitely feels like they're trying to usher in that quote unquote new Marvel, kind of idea. When you look at the shows that we're getting and the characters that we're seeing, they're not what we think of as your A-list characters. It's not the Iron Mans, it's not Captain America. You know what I mean? It's not Thor. We're following Vision. We're following Wanda.
The irony is, I always considered Iron Man a B-level character.
Well, he was.
You know what I mean? That's
for a time. But when you look at the Avengers, Iron Man's always been a very central, key, important character, for the Avengers. He's all, it's funny because Captain America I think of as the quintessential Avenger, but Captain America gets introduced much later in the run, and he actually replaces the Hulk if you actually read the original Avengers comic. Which I always recommend people who are interested in stuff definitely go check out and read the original comics. They're a lot of fun, and it's interesting to see, what the history of the Marvel universe was versus what we're actually seeing play out in the shows and the movies.
It's also interesting to see what it is that they decide to pepper in the MCU, because obviously they take stuff from the comics, but they change them. The Civil War is a great example of that. Like, there is a Civil War comic. In fact, it's a huge, it goes through all the different characters, and it's a big event, right? It's a big event thing that happened in the Marvel comics. The MCU's take is very different, but obviously, it was inspired by that,
I could totally rescue that Planet comment you just made about Pepper and talk about how it relates to a lot of things happening in Marvel Comics and the MCU, but I'm just going to let it go. For those of you who are paying attention, you just got every single reference I just made.